Welcome to the Encore Audio Archives YouTube channel. I'm Taper Dave, and this is my channel. I've uploaded hundreds of talks here that I've recorded at meetings in West LA, and I've also recorded conventions starting in 2013. I've got a bunch of those up. And Walt and Mary Murray, the original owners of Encore Audio Archives, started the company in the 80s, and Walt recorded Joe and Charlie's and a bunch of stuff down in Vista, California. My sobriety date is June 20th of 1994. I hope you find something you like, so please like and subscribe to my channel and comment down below. If you want to hear something that I don't have or that you don't see, I'll see that I get it. Anyways, take care and have a great day if you want to.
Please join me in welcoming our next speaker, Christopher.
I'm Christopher, an alcoholic. Hi, Christopher. Just an alcoholic. My water, somebody else's water. Water. I was awakened this morning by my 7-year-old daughter who bounded in. And the only thing that really makes that remarkable is when I first came here, that wasn't likely to be the case. I don't remember any New Year's morning in which I woke up. I don't think I ever woke up in jail on New Year's. I woke up in a mental hospital on New Year's, but it wasn't a surprise. I'd been there the day before and several days prior. I'd woken up on the floor. I'd woken up propped up in the bathroom door once. Obviously, I had a plan and just had to sit down and have a little rest first. But New Year's, I don't know. New Year's wasn't a particular reason to celebrate, except that it seemed that everybody had a sense of celebration about the night, and I kind of enjoyed that. I enjoyed your willingness to celebrate something. And that's about as much as holidays meant to me. I started drinking when I was in single numbers. I started drinking because it was something that my brother and sister wouldn't do, and they seemed impressed when I did it in front of them. I was the youngest of 3. I grew up on a farm in New Jersey in the early 12th century when they still had farms. I learned all the kindness of human beings from cows. Early on, I looked at the farm from down the lane. I thought that I didn't know how things were supposed to be, but they weren't supposed to be this way. There was just some intuitive sense that there was another way that it was supposed to be, and of course, nothing in my life reflected that that was the case, except Earl, and I didn't know him yet. But that's just between us. So I went about my business getting in trouble in school the way I was supposed to, threatening kids with knives and exploding fireworks and stuff that other kids were doing. Well, no, actually they weren't doing. And then I was sent away to school in the 7th grade. I was in boarding school in the 7th grade, which with a bunch of other kids that were sent away to school in the 7th grade. It wasn't a big deal. I used to drink on holidays, on vacations. I had watched my parents, I'd watched their friends, and it seemed that drinking was a large part of being an adult, so I saw nothing wrong with hurrying up this business of being an adult and getting used to it. When I was early teenage years, I was taking flasks to dances. But in the neighborhood that I was raised in, they called them cocktail parties. They didn't just call them dances. So my feeling was they were training us for cocktail parties, and the only way you could be properly trained was if you brought your own, because I was only 12, 13 years old. And then I was misbehaving. I wanted to get my way, and when people were doing things that seemed to stand between me and my way, I would have an absence of ideas on how to deal with that, and I would sometimes threaten them with sharp-pointed objects. When I was 16, I started threatening myself with sharp-pointed objects because it was clear they were causing so many problems, I just wasn't up to keeping up with them. So I wound up in a mental hospital when I was there. I escaped twice, wound up in jail once in Rhode Island, and wound up in Bellevue once. So I just went from flower to flower like any busy bee. And I was discharged from there against medical advice. While there, I had learned about marijuana and speed and how to appear to change without actually changing, which was a big ticket item for me because you had all these expectations and I had no ability to fulfill them. But I had to make you think that I was working towards that so you'd leave me alone. That's all I wanted. I just wanted you to leave me alone. I went through my 20s lurching from opportunity to opportunity, in and out of jails and straitjackets and stuff. Not all the time, obviously. I was having a lot of good times as well. And that's interesting to remember. When I was 30, however, I was living out here in a house with no heat, in a sleeping bag on the floor, and I would roll out of my sleeping bag in the morning and I would just moan on the floor. It was there that the thought crossed my mind that my mother had not had a drink for a couple of years, and I knew that my mother was an alcoholic because I'd walked into a very big house and smelled vodka, and they told you that you couldn't smell vodka. And I figured that she must be consuming a fair quantity of this stuff to fill up the whole house smelling like this. And then I'd seen her lying in bed like a big, bloated, white walrus. I don't know, not a very flattering picture of your mother, but that's kind of how she looked to me. I wasn't raised in a close family unit, you know. We were each cannibals, and we were each eyeing each other for the next meal. It was just the way it was, you know. My brother and my sister and myself, we were independent contractors, and we learned from one another. My sister would pick on me, and then I would take what I'd learned from her to pick on my older brother. It was all psychological warfare, except for my brother, who, of course, could just apply sheer brute force. But I learned from him, too. When my sister got braces, I applied sheer brute force, and it was remarkable the change of events in my family. Anyway, so there I was, rolling around the floor, making these sounds. And the only thing, I didn't know anything about Alcoholics Anonymous. My mother had gotten sober. The last place she went to centered Alcoholics Anonymous, and she hadn't had a drink for a few years. And that was all I knew about it. So I called up Alcoholics Anonymous, and later in the day there was a message that somebody had called me back. And I went with that person to a meeting. And I didn't hear much of what was going on. I went to 1 or 2 meetings a week, didn't hear anybody talking about smoking dope, so I was smoking dope as soon as I got out of the meeting. And eventually I went back to drinking, believe it or not. And about a year later, I got to the point where I just, if I had had a gun in my apartment, I would have just left the keys in the door and gone to the gun and pulled the trigger. I was just tired. I couldn't do this anymore. I couldn't do life anymore, drunk or sober. And I thought, what do I do now? And I thought, well, I could try that AA thing again. So I still had a meeting directory, and I went to a meeting where I knew it was nearby, somebody I knew I could score some drugs off of, and went to that meeting, and a fellow there that I'd shot pool with at Barney's Beanery said, do you do anything else? And I said, well, I do some recreational drugs. He said, you might as well give it all up now or you'll never know the difference. And that, to me, was the first promise of Alcoholics Anonymous, was that there was a difference. That's what I needed. I was dying of the sameness. Things had been the same shade of gray for so long, it just hadn't made any difference. Nothing made any difference. So he marked some meetings in a book, and I was going to Ohio Street and Federal, and they told me to go to 90 meetings in 90 days, and I didn't have a counter plan. I was bereft of ideas, deeply, deeply and forlornly disconsolate with my failure to be a human being, drunk or sober, because alcohol wasn't doing it for me anymore. Alcohol wasn't stopping it. It wasn't changing how I felt. So I started going to meetings. And then I heard someone say you have to go to a meeting when you don't want to go to a meeting. And I filed that away. And then I heard John Jay tell somebody that a depression was a low place in the ground. Get over it. And I thought, man, I'm glad that wasn't me. And then I heard somebody say to somebody who was making fun of somebody else at the meeting, said, be careful, you don't know who the winners are around here. And 18 years later, that person that had been made fun of was indeed still sober. And I don't know where that person who had made fun of them was. There were a lot of remarkable things. It was a great thing. I spent my first 7 years in Architects of Adversity meetings. Architects I believed in, you know. Architects was like the fellow that comes up from a great depth too fast and has to be recompressed. You know, you got to be with people you're comfortable with. Brentwood was a nice place to visit, but it was, you know, much too clean. There was nothing interesting going on. Everyone had solution. That wouldn't have been the way I would have characterized it then. But I went back to an architects meeting when I turned 20 because I thought I should show the flag, because they always tell you you can't stay sober in architects meetings. And after the halfway point, I turned to the person I was there with and I said, my God, you can't stay sober in here. I'd never heard so many frightening ideas said with a solemnity of the absolute word of God in my life. And I thought, isn't it wonderful? Isn't it just bloody wonderful that you can come in where these are the only people, the only ideas that make any sense at all? There was a guy named Arthur who wrote in the world's smallest print on bus schedules. I loved this guy. I could just watch him for hours. A calligrapher from, I don't know, the 12th century. There were just a lot of wonderful, crazy people. And I love wonderful, crazy people. You know, the mental hospitals didn't disturb me. It was the people outside of mental hospitals that disturbed me. And I think if you look around our government today, ladies and gentlemen, nothing. $12 million? Anyway, that's another subject. So there I was going to meetings. I was going to a meeting every day, simply because they told me to. And I got a sponsor. I asked a fellow if he would be my sponsor, and he said, I don't know, and that scared me to death. He had 3 years sober. It was longer than God as far as I was concerned. We talked, and he said, well, you can call me and we'll see how it goes. And I thought, that's close enough. And then I met somebody else that he sponsored, and I realized that he really needed his time for the other people because I really wasn't that bad. So I didn't call him very often. Besides, I thought I'd show better if I didn't call as often as the other people because I wasn't as needy. I was raised that way, you know. Don't annoy people, Christopher. They're not interested in your problems. And believe it or not, I lost interest in calling him. Then after about a year, I thought I should write a fourth step since everyone was talking about it. So I wrote a 38-page autobiography. And then I found somebody to read it to. And that person said, why don't you write drama instead of living it? And I felt that he misunderstood what I had just delivered to him. I'd heard people talk about how they had this great feeling of release after they had read their fourth step. And I started to feel something. I didn't know what it was, so I went to the movies. I went to 4 movies in a row. I wasn't interested in feeling things. A friend of mine, I had said to her at a meeting, how you doing? She said, well, I feel I must say. And I said, how's your new car? I feel I have to tell you How's your left foot? I feel I have to. Everything began with I feel. What is this I feel I have to? What is this curious way of speaking you have suddenly acquired? And she said, well, my sponsor said that since I didn't know what a feeling was, if it fell dead in front of me, I had to begin every sentence with I feel. And I thought, that's my prescription for hell. I'd have to drink based on that. I lived in a small room. It was about 12 feet by 12 feet and had a beam running through it, and I had a heavy bag hanging from the beam. I'd come back from meetings and I would hit that until I was too tired to hit it anymore. Throughout the day I would hit it. I didn't have names for feelings, and I didn't want names for feelings. And I'm 25 years sober now, and I have the suspicion that if you have names for things, you seem to acquire them. It's amazing. You can have there's some new disorder that they're trying to facilitate on people these days. I can't remember what it is. Probably forgetful memory syndrome. Oh my God, I've got it, you know? I think that human beings are complicated creatures, and there are a lot of feelings that we have that are much like harmonic notes, you know. They're made of compound notes, this one, and they make a harmonic third. And you can't address that one directly except that you direct your attention to both of the components. And I just think that it works for me that way. There are other people that can, line them up like bottles and shoot them off the ledge. That's not me. I think we're much more complicated than that. I'm happy about that because Alcoholics Anonymous works for me. My sponsor, my second sponsor, I got when I was about 2 years sober. I forget what I was going to tell you, except I'll tell you how I got him. Always an interesting story, at least to me. I was some time without sponsorship. I was sponsored by my fellows in Architects of Adversity. Some are sicker than others, and some are just doing the best they can. And I was a little bit of both, column A and B. Then I heard this man speaking at a book study Monday night in West Hollywood. And he just had such clarity. He spoke to people's dilemmas with such unerring focus. And their bullshit just fell to the side, just checking for children. And I needed to believe that the person that was my sponsor had that. And I was able to call him, and I asked him if we could talk, and he said, come over. And he said, if you want what I've got, you've got to do what I did to get it. And I waited for him to tell me what it was that he wanted me to do that I couldn't do, and he never did that. He was very generous. He wanted me to be involved in AA. He said it was time that I started giving back. He said he wanted me to get involved in H&I, answering phones at central office. He wanted me to go to a book study, step study once a week. And that was it. He didn't say, call me every morning at 4 o'clock in the morning. He didn't say, call me before you go to bed at night. He didn't say, meet me here, do this, do that. He didn't do any of that because it was, after all, going to be my sobriety, and I was going to have to figure out how to live in it. And when it didn't work, I could talk to him. There are others that had a great deal more direction given them than me. But that's the way it was for me. His name was Donald Madden, and he was a man of enormous patience and kindness and tolerance. He led the way. He didn't say, do this, do that. He simply did it and said, come on over here. And you'd all come over there. And it was a wonderful crew of people that he sponsored. They were all institutionalized at some point, and it was quite a wonderful thing because he'd been in and out of the same one 26 times. This was a group of people I could feel enormously comfortable with. The fact that people like that could stay sober was a great deal of hope to me. When I was about, well, I'll tell you, at 3 years sober, I was at a meeting, and I said to the fellow next to me, I feel like I felt when I was brand new, day number one, and I did. But then I hadn't really done too much to change that. I had been enduring life with the companionship of my architects of adversity people, and not really availing myself of my sponsor a whole lot. And this fellow said to me, you know, you don't have to drink again to start over. And that was key, because that was exactly where I was headed. I said as much to him. I said, you know, since I feel like I'm brand new, I might as well drink again. And as I mentioned, there's a fair amount of convoluted logic that occurs in architects. This made perfect sense to me. And he said, as I said, you don't have to drink again to start over. And that saved me a large tumble. When I was coming up on 5 years sober, 4.5 years sober, for about 8 months every morning, it took me a half an hour in the morning just to get to zero, just to find some thought that would make it possible to make it into the day. It was just all too much for me. All way too much for me. And I'll tell you today even, just yesterday, I was sitting and meditating in the morning, and my brain goes in very dark places all by itself. You know, it just takes me in there, and there's nothing good that happens. And I started thinking, God, do I need therapy for this? I mean, I'm just sitting here meditating, and I can't get past having my children stolen from me, and when my brain goes there for a second, I'm completely there. What is wrong with me? And I thought, well, the truth is, the problem is, you're not in the present. That's the problem. It's not therapy. You're not in the bloody present. Right here, right in this moment, everything is just fine, and this is the only place I belong. When I stray from this moment, I get into a world of trouble. My ability to deal with the future is disastrous. The woman that is now my wife, when we were dating, said, the reason you don't do well with the future is because you don't practice positive visualization. So I thought, that's probably true. I'll try that. She's a sane person. So I'm driving down Beverly Boulevard practicing positive visualization. And I'm thinking, and then they get married, and there's a house, and the children are playing in the front yard. And then Angelique has to go somewhere, and the plane crashes, but I deal with it really well, and I help a lot of other people. And it's hard on the children, but I bring them through. And then all of a sudden I'm coming up in a stoplight, and I think, wait a second. Wait a second. In a good visualization about the future, you don't have a plane crash. But I was already quite into it, and I'd already overcome it. Now that's with conscious thought applied to my future. Needless to say, the present is the only place where I can be and not have to kill myself for the just sheer anguish of everything else. The past doesn't bother me much. I'm 57 years old, and it should. You know, I would like to have a past that was littered with enormous successes, one linked to another like a string of pearls, and it's just not the case. I'm a procrastinating, lazy son of a bitch. And that's what my past is largely filled with: procrastination, laziness, and general son of a bitchiness. Intermittent moments of meditation once every 24 hours for the last 10 years, which are the high points, and the high points that my children bring me quite unbidden. You know, their little faces just doing things that just light up my experience of life and make me grateful on a daily basis that I didn't kill myself, that I was not successful all those times that I tried to kill myself, all the times that I wanted to die, all the times that it was just entirely too much to be a human being on this earth. So that period of time of 8 months of just trying to get to zero in the morning, and I was getting the great advice from great people, and it wasn't changing anything. And I was on my knees one morning. Fred Ellis had said, just get on your knees and say the Our Father in the morning of the night. And I was doing that, and nothing was changing. And I was on my knees this one time, and all of a sudden this guy, none of the above. I'm on my knees, and I'm thinking, you know, I need a sign from God is what I need. I need I need a break is what I need. I need some kind of indication that I'm not alone in this, because I felt like I was floating cold and alone, naked in the universe, and it wasn't changing. That was the problem. It wasn't changing. I was doing the things that were suggested, and it wasn't changing. And then I thought, what if there is no God? You know? They talk about it in here. They talk about it loosely, and they make a big deal about it. But what if they're having the same experience that I'm having, and they're just pumping it up? What if, in real fact, there is no God? And that's about as scary a thought as I could have. And it was followed shortly by the thought of, you know, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if there's a God or there isn't a God, because you won't live long enough, pal, to die a sober death without faith. It's faith that sustains you. It's not the face-to-face contact with God. Nobody gets that, except as you get through other people and the occasional extraordinary experience. But by and large, it's a matter of faith. And it's faith that will carry me from this moment to the next moment, when there is no reasonable evidence that there's any way to get there. And I started to laugh. I started to laugh because this was good news. Because quite frankly, you can't scratch the surface and get any more removed than the fact that it doesn't matter whether there's God or not. People get into a lot of arguments about this. People kill a lot of people about this. But what if you say it doesn't matter? Because it's faith that I need. And it was indeed faith that I needed. And then that faith developed an idea based on the Big Bang theory of the universe. Stuff explodes out, particles find particles, create other particles, atoms create molecules, create stars, explode out. So what the fuck, you're thinking? Ooh, there's a child. Who snuck that in here? Anyway, what that means to me is that everything you see is made of this original equipment stuff. All of me is made of this original equipment stuff. They didn't add a half a cup of human being halfway through the evolution of the universe. Oh, we'll swirl some of this in. Who'll swirl some of this in? I don't get into that question. I am merely a product of the evolving universe. This is just stuff of the universe. All of me is of God, but I am not all of God. What does this do for me? Well, what are manifestations of self? Selfishness, self-seeking, fear, self-delusion. Anything with a self and a hyphen is a manifestation of self. If you would just do what I want you to, I could be happy. If you'd stop doing that, I'd be happy. If you'd give me some of that, I'd be happy. If you'd stop giving me some of that, I'd be happy. Every time I put up one of these conditions, I'm doing two things. One, I'm walling myself off from the natural unfolding of the universe, or subset God, if you will. Two, who gets to make those choices in the big picture? Clearly not me. This must be that I am now taking on the role of God. If I can change you, I can be happy. If I can change you and you and you, then I'll be happy. If you'll do what I want, I'll be happy. Puts me in the condition of God. Well, that puts me in conflict with everything that's happening around me, in me and around me. And the fourth step is about me coming to recognize what that means in my life and clearing it away so that I can have a human experience, untethered to my conditions of how it's supposed to be. Which is not to say that I cannot change my lot. We're given power here. To the extent that we give up power, we are given all the power we can possibly use. It requires us to use it. Our actions are our footsteps. Every moment I procrastinate is not an act of God defying me and preventing me from achieving what I might like to achieve. It is merely me holding on to my comfort, refusing to move forward. God doesn't care. If you use the word God as I'm familiar with it. God is a generic form for whatever is our source. And you can have access to that form through prayer and meditation. You can have access to that form through believing that Jesus is the path to God. You can have access to that form believing that the laws of Judaism are the path to that God. You can have access to that if you believe that praying 5 times a day with Islam is the path to that God. They are, as Donald said, the mail gets delivered. The deal is, can I strip away enough of myself? Can I live momentarily, fearlessly enough to say, you take it? I can if I've done the steps prior to that. Because if I've looked at my own experience, I know that I can't. And that's all I need to know. I don't have to know what God is, and I can't know what God is. I mean, if God is everything or nothing, and I figure that's the only game available, you try to pour everything in one ear, you'll be vaporized the minute the nozzle touches your ear. You know, we're just small little critters here. The power that is available to us is huge to the extent that we move away from manifestations of self. And that is the action of our will. The proper use of will is to recognize what is our self that is getting in the way and move forward. When I was 8 years sober, a fellow took me through the big book a line at a time. It changed my sober experience. Prior to that time, I thought if you were talking about happy, joyous, and free, and I was talking about happy, joyous, and free, we were both blowing smoke. You know, we're just doing the best we can, and we're just pumping it up with some happy words. After going through the big book and recognizing how at depth the condition is that it is not their fault, nor never can be, I realized that the freedom really is within, that the great reality is deep within. And that led to a kind of freedom that I had never known. It led me to the kind of freedom that you'd been talking about and I hadn't experienced. When I was about 10 years sober, I met this woman that I married, and I didn't plan to marry her. I just met at one point. I saw the opportunity to sow the seeds of the end of the relationship, as a matter of fact, because I lived my life out of the comfortable chair in the corner of my living room from which I could captain the world. I could come out amongst you for a couple hours at a time and then go back to the chair and control you. You didn't have to be in my presence for my control, and it was best, in fact, if you weren't. And I thought, if I just look to the horizon and say, what's next? If I truly give up trying to manage this, I will probably lose that comfortable chair in the corner of the living room. We might even get married. We could have children. Goodbye, comfortable chair in the corner of the living room. And all those things have taken place. And my world is expanding. My world has been expanding since the day I came in here. I lived such a small, terrified world, and now I live a much bigger world. I still have all the fears that are available to me outside of this moment. But in this moment, and knowing how important conscious contact, that 11th step, the conscious contact to me is being present. It is only available by being present in this moment. It can't be present in diagramming the future or rediagramming the past. It can only be present in this moment. If I can be here now, the devils that are in my mind cannot have at me. When I was 15 years sober, my noble sponsor upped and died. I have forgiven him for that, but I still find it just terribly inconvenient. It's 10 years now, and as I've mentioned upon occasion, I'd like him to come back for a visit periodically. In this process of being sober, my sister died of cancer, and it took her a long time to do it. She was tough. And I recall going to see her and holding her hand, which had a number of tubes going in and out, and she was drifting away. And I thought, God, how much I owe to Alcoholics Anonymous to be able to be here, to be present, and to recognize that I'm not sitting here with the container of my sister. I'm sitting here with my sister, the soul of her. I am here with that in this moment, and it's a wonderful thing. And all the attendant garbage of medicine that is so depressing is not a problem. And then she woke out of wherever she was, and she looked at me, and she called me Tofi, short for Christopher. And she said, "Tofi, oh, you were just in a dream with me. Or was it a hallucination?" "Oh, well, who better to be in hallucination with than you?" And it was quite charming. After Donald died, I was talking to a man about going through the steps again. And he said, "Tell me about your 11th step." And I said, "Well, when I was 25, I got very spiritually involved in a number of things and into deep meditation and whatnot. That came and went when I got, with the drinking and whatnot and drugs, and then I got sober. And in sobriety, I've periodically sat down to meditate, and I've gotten, into this blissful place of peace. And then I would go out and I'd have a flat tire, which in itself wasn't so catastrophic, but then the spare tire was flat. Not only that, I didn't have any money to call AAA, if I had a AAA card. Or I would go to the bank knowing I had at least $30, and the bank would give you $20 for an ATM card, and I had no money in my pocket, and I was almost out of gas in the car, and I had no food, and I'd go to the cash machine, and it would take the card and tell me that I was overdrawn. I said, when these things occurred to me after meditating, I realized that there's a lesson here. And the lesson is that you spent so much of your life trying to get out of this world that your spiritual condition will be found by being in and of this world. And I thought that was a pretty good answer. And he said, okay. And I thought, then he thought that too, and we talked some more. And finally he said, it's a funny thing how somebody's willing to go through all the steps all over again just rather than do the last half of the 11th step. And I thought, I hate having stuff like that said to me, because it's obviously true. And it was so glibly done. So I set out and realized that it was, for all my stories, it was time to treat the 11th step like it was one of the 12 steps, rather than the bastard step that you can or can't do according to how you feel. Which I'm quite sure nobody else does. And so I found this meditation teacher, and rather than involving others in my tale, I will simply tell you that I paid, did, I don't know, however many sessions of this meditation it was, but it started then, and I've every day since then, for 10 years, for 20 minutes in the morning, I do exercises for my back so that I don't have back pain. And it seems to work for the most part. And for 20 minutes every day, I meditate. I sit quietly, and I try and still all the noise of my being and see what happens. Just see what comes. That section on page 86, is it? Where I ask God to direct my thinking, that it be divorced from self-pity, dishonest, or self-seeking motives. Which I find actually a little redundant, because if I ask God to direct my thinking, then it's not really up to me to tell him which ones are in play and not, but that's a side issue. Anyway, I sit there and I'm quiet for this time, and the one thing that I can tell you that I know it benefits is that at least once every 24 hours I have to come back to this moment with me and my God. I wish that I was doing it 5 times a day. I think that that's a very good plan, because at least 5 times a day I would stop the cycle of my thinking. 5 times. Where is the pain that 5 times a day you spend 20 minutes with your God? Well, that's a little bit out of my league, thanks. Well, so once a day I'm doing that, and have been for some time. And the benefits, I don't know. I'm a little easier going for doing it, and it is, after all, one of the steps. And the rewards of it are that I'm still sober. I go to a minimum 2 meetings a week, and I sponsor about 7 guys. And I do what I'm asked to do around here, and Alcoholics Anonymous is my cathedral. You know, there are times when I think, well, maybe I should go play in that church or that church, but this is my church. This has all the answers for me, and I don't really need to go anywhere else. And thanks very much.
Sorry to interrupt your viewing. Taper Dave here. Just wanted to take a second to ask you to like and subscribe to my channel. Let me know if you like what you're listening. I've got some very good talks here, and this one's a great one. Just curious, do you think this is better than Zoom? Tell me what you think. Okay, this is how I prepare my drone for launching. I like to do it inside the cab of my truck so I'm not standing outside in the weather. To install the joysticks for control, up and down, right and left, powered on. I have an Android phone that I use to connect it to the drone with. And it's actually controlled through the iPhone, through an app. Oops, wrong way. It's actually controlled through the iPhone, or through this Android phone, through the app. It's actually controlled through the Android phone, through an app, and you connect it through this short connection right here.
Remote control connected.
Remote control's connected. So I pull out the drone. I have to extend the legs. Long legs extended first, then the short legs. Remove the gimbal protector. Set that aside, then power it on one short burst and one long burst. I lay it down. So I have to go to calibrate. So the drone's not connected yet. It shows you here as this drone gets disconnected, even though the remote's powered on. So the drone has to establish it's connected. So I go into the app to calibration mode. First I'll calibrate the remote controller. Start calibration. Out, in, oop, out, in, up, down, and then this little wheel is to control the gimbal. So it's calibrated. Go to gimbal calibration, start calibration, and then it calibrates the gimbal. I don't know if that shows up. The gimbal's moving all over the place. Changes, you can see it on the video. And I'm calibrated to take off. It's acquired 7 satellites at the moment. There are 26 satellites up in the sky, which it has to acquire before you can take off. So it's connected. It's got enough satellites. This is white. I can go to press this little arrow button, swipe right to take off, and it would start the motors if I slid this to the right, but I'll wait till I get outside. Don't want to do it inside.